Okay, Common Core Algebra 1, the start of our next unit, which is going to be all about exponents and, more importantly, exponential functions. We're going to split this first lesson up until our first quiz probably into two parts. So today we're going to look at something called the properties of exponents, part 1, and we're going to look at mostly products. So product of powers, power of a power, which is going to be a lot like a product, and power of a product, and then the one that's a little bit different than those is a zero product or zero power property, which is actually going to be probably the easiest of the 7 properties we're going to look at. So 4 in this first video, 4 in the next video. Okay, so when we first of all talk about exponents, remember that means we're going to have some variable or number raised to some power. Okay, now one thing I would say, if I look at these two things, they mean two very different things. Here, only the x is squared, while the 3 is not. Here, everything inside is squared. So we'll talk actually about those two examples as well. Your first property is called the product of powers, and so this says when like bases are multiplied, you're going to add the powers. So when we talk about bases, what that means, looking at this first more simple one, the x's are the bases, and so when we have like bases multiplied, meaning those two x's are the same thing, what we're going to do is take that and add our powers. So 3 and 5 are the powers, and we would simplify this to say x to the 8th. Okay, a little more complex is when we have more than one base here, but it's still the same idea. We're going to take each base individually. So we're going to take our x's together. 9 and 5 is going to give us 14. And then our y's together. The trick here, this one's pretty easy. You see a 2, but this y is not raised to the 3rd power. When no power is written there, it's a 1. Kind of like when there's no number in front of the x, the coefficient is a 1. So this would give us y to the 3rd, and then z, 3 and 9. Whoops, 3 and, see, I haven't caught myself there. 3 and 2 should give us an exponent of 5. Okay, and typically when we write this in standard form, which standard form just means your variables are in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with x, then y, then z. Okay, that is your product of powers property. The next one is what's called a power of a power, and that's when we have a base and a power raised to another power. So you see here we have an x raised to a power, and then the whole thing raised to another power. What you do then, instead of adding this time, we're going to multiply the powers. So this is going to stay x, and 2 times 3 would be x to the 6. Okay, another way to think of this is to say x squared times x squared times x squared, because there's 3 of them. And now we would have the previous property we just talked about. We add up 2 plus 2 plus 2 gives us 6. Same idea. A little more complex is when we have 2 in there, and this is actually going to be the next property as well. We need to raise 3 to the 4th and then x to the 12th, and if we simplify that 3 to the 4th, we'd have 81x to the 12th. Okay, that one actually is a combination which creates this next one. We have power of a product. So you see we have a product of two things inside in the simple one, x squared and y to the 5th, and we have a power outside. Well, essentially this is going to act like distribution. We're going to raise each factor, meaning each term inside, to that power. So we'd end up with x to the 6, because 3 times 2 is 6, and y to the 15th, because 3 times 5 is 15. So this is a lot like distribution. A little more complex then is when we have multiple things in here. So first, let's think about that first property. We can put together our x's and we can put together our y's, and that'll help us simplify a little bit. So we can't drop our parentheses yet. We're going to do inside the parentheses first. Remember, there's a 1 right there, so we're going to end up with 9x to the 4th, y to the 5th, all to the 2nd power. And here, this is where it can be a little tricky. We need to actually take 9 to the 2nd, because this is a coefficient, not a power. We actually need to raise it to the 2nd power, so that would give us 81. And now, powers, we actually multiply. So coefficients we raise to the power, powers we multiply, and so we're going to have x to the 8th and y to the 10th. And that would be as simplified as we can go then. Okay, the last one then is probably the easiest one we're going to even look at. Anytime we have something to the 0 power, it is always simply 1. So everything that's raised to the 0 power is 1. X to the 0 then is 1. If we look at this next one, we're only going to simplify that bottom piece first. So we have 1 over 1, and then we can simplify 1 over 1, and that's going to give us a final answer of 1. Okay, those are your first four first four properties of exponents. They're all about products, and the next ones obviously then are going to be about what are called quotients or division, and one other thing we'll add negative exponents in as well. So we'll have 3 on the next video on properties of exponents, part 2. See you then.